Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Backlog Banter. My name is Tucker Hazel. Today, I am not joined by any of my regular co-hosts. I am instead joined by a game developer. That's right, not just people playing games on this channel, someone that actually made a game or two. And we're going to be talking about those games today. This is May Gardens from Red Nexus Games. We're going to be talking about Fowl Damage, her new game that I have played and really, really liked. That I think you should play as well. But we're going to be getting into everything about that game. May, I'm so happy to have you on here to join me as my very first developer interview.
Thank you so much.
I have one question that I got to start off with. It's a burning question on all of our minds. How do you like your eggs?
Scrambled eggs, a little bit runny.
Ooh, okay. All right. I honestly think that a egg that's a little bit more raw is more visually appealing. Like my appetite, I'm like, oh, I want to eat that a little more. I have the same sort of thing like raw fish. Like sometimes I feel like I'm a bear when I'm looking at raw fish. I'm like, raw fish looks so much more appetizing.
It looks good. Like that's like a salmon. It's a little bit
Exactly.
translucent almost. Like, oh yeah.
Exactly. So I appreciate the slight runniness to your scrambled eggs, but everyone, the developer of Fowl Damage, an egg-based game, if you were unaware from the thumbnail and our egg talk here at the front, likes her game or her eggs, and I guess her games slightly runny. Uh, you want your game to run as well. But May, I got a question for you in terms of games. We're done with the egg talk for now. We'll get back to it as we get into Fowl Damage. But in terms of games, what do you have a game that you're playing right now and really enjoying?
I just got Core Keeper. I've been really enjoying that. I had friends describe it to me before I got it as kind of Terraria like in terms of progression and like bosses gating you to like new upgrades and stuff. But it's a top down kind of like base builder instead of the like 2D platformer that Terraria is. I've been really enjoying that.
Would you say that like those kind of survival games, that's something you like tend towards in your taste?
Not usually. So this is sort of I like Terraria a lot. So I guess more of that sort of like the survival game, but has like a bit more of a combat focus. I think kind of attracts me more so.
Yeah, yeah, but obviously, Foul Damage, nothing like that. So you've got a
No.
variety in taste for your games. But yeah, I play a wide variety of games, and I have to admit that those games like Core Keeper, more survival focused games, like I've played some in the past. They don't really jump out at me as like something I hunger for to like seek out every new one. But I recently, actually, after I played Foul Damage, I played another game that released around that time, which is called I Am Your Beast, which is a
hmm
really fast first person shooter with this just crazy combat and great music and stuff. And I really, really, really like that game. So I recommend that if you like super hot, it's kind of like super hot, kind of like neon white, but definitely has its own flavor. Really, really like that game. I played Foul Damage first. It was my number one priority last weekend when it's like, all right, what am I playing? Foul Damage. I bought it. I believe it was like 10% off or something right now on Steam as a new game, and I can tell you, I played through the game 4 times.
4 times. I saw you play it 3 times.
Yes, and I played through it another time, yesterday, but that is very, very uncommon for me. I just don't replay games almost ever. Also because I knew I was going to be interviewing you, I was like, "Alright, I need to do my homework. I need to do my due diligence and replay the game." But obviously, as the person who made the game, do you have an estimate on how many times you've played through it start to finish?
Start to finish, actually probably not that many. Piecemeal. If we were to stitch all these pieces together, hundreds, I guess. But start to finish, maybe a dozen
Sure.
times.
Yeah, so I'll
Yeah,
I'll I'll catch up to you is what I'm hearing.
yeah.
Um, but in terms of you as a game developer, I'm curious, what games were you playing when you were maybe a teenager that got you into wanting to make games? Were there any that tickled your mind so much? Not necessarily your first games or like your favorite games, but ones that you were playing them when you were in your ripe teenage years. You're like, wow, I should do this myself.
Teenage years wasn't good. Playing a lot of League of Legends. Gonna be honest. um, I don't know if I drew. Well, I've drawn some inspiration from that, which maybe I can get into a bit later. But I've kind of always wanted to make games. Like before I had the knowledge and the access to a computer for game development, I would make pen and paper games and force my parents to play them. I'm sure they were all terrible. Whoever sat next to me on the school bus would be like instantly enrolled in like a basically a one player tabletop RPG that I would invent with a notebook
Yeah.
or a calculator or a. I wish I'd like found a pair of dice or something to discover randomness and be able to. I would have gone crazy with that, but I've always really been fascinated by that form of interaction of like an interface and how do you design it. And
Do you have any of those like paper tabletop games that you made? Do you like have you kept them around?
I do have some old stuff. Yeah,
Yeah,
I have stuff even from when I was like 6, and it's just me drawing mazes
cool.
that I'm like putting like Mario things
Yeah, of
inside of.
course,
And
of course. Now, this is just a totally off the wall question, and maybe you haven't thought about it. But have you ever considered like trying to digitize any of those games in a video game format? Like, see if you can update that design and like pull inspiration from what you came up with when you were like 7.
that'd be really cute.
Could be fun,
No, I've never really thought about it. Yeah,
even if it's like a 30-minute game or whatever. Like, you know,
yeah, just a little project, make a little maze game off
yeah,
of my
put that
doodles.
out on Itch. Yeah, which I believe Foul Damage was initially on Itch. Was that a demo or just like sort of your first test version of the game?
Back in 2018, there was the first demoed version of Fowl Damage that I put up there. Actually, I haven't put a build up yet, but I am intending to put the latest full build up on it as well this week.
Oh, really? Oh, the full game for purchase or for free?
For purchase, yeah. I think it's 15 US.
You've been working on this game for a while, and you've been working on games, as you were saying, with your tabletop stuff, paper stuff, for even longer. But in between that, did you take any coding classes, design classes, or just something you just sort of taught yourself?
I started teaching myself in high school using Game Maker, and they're like yeah, I guess it's yeah, their programming language that's built into there. And then I did a couple of years of computer science, which definitely helped sort of have a stronger understanding of programming, not just in Game Maker. Really, for the most part, it was I was continuing to do side projects on the side outside of classes because at least back then the coursework was very computer science. So there wasn't a whole lot of applied lessons or teachings, and so I was continuing to just make games on the side, continuing to hone those skills.
Have you released any of those games that you were working on? As far as I can find online, your work on Foul Damage, which you, as we'll talk about, you designed mostly entirely yourself, and then you also worked a little bit on Peglin with Red Nexus Games. Were those your first like commercially released projects, or have you put anything else out?
Technically, Red Nexus Games' first release, Friday Night Bullet Arena, it's called, which is a local multiplayer game that was just Dylan and I straight out of Dylan, who is the lead designer and creator of Peglin and the founder of Red Nexus Games. That was like the two of us straight out of university trying to make a commercial release.
Cool. Okay, yeah. So you've got a couple of releases under your belt, but doing this game yourself and being a part of a team on some other projects, I'm curious what pushed you for Foul Damage to make that more of a solo project? Did you like the pressure of doing it mostly by yourself? Do you prefer working in a team? How do you feel about future projects coming off of finishing and releasing Foul Damage? What's the sort of work balance for you in terms of being a solo dev versus a part of a team?
So initially started as sort of out of necessity, I guess. That first commercial title released was not particularly commercially successful. We were kind of forced to go our own ways for a little bit, find work where we could. And Foul Damage was just a prototype that I started working on the side. Then, 2020 hit, basically completely halted production. Anyways, Peglin was his like big surprise success. Dylan kind of hit me up and said, "Hey, we need some extra hands on deck. I would love for you to come and work on Peglin." So that was really great. At some point, we sort of were like, Foul Damage is sort of like 80-90% done, just sitting there. It'd be a shame to just not ever do anything with it. So we sort of figured out this weird like internal publishing arrangement where I work at Red Nexus Games, but also it's like Red Nexus Games is publishing Foul Damage, but I'm also yeah. So
From a publishing agreement standpoint, it does make sense that it would be something a little bit separate because as I remember asking a little bit and learning a little bit about on the show floor, because you and I actually met in person at PAX West
mhm.
2024, which was very fun. And I do have to admit, and part of the reason why I reached out to you for an interview, that Foul Damage was by far my game of the show. Was certainly the one I was at the booth at the most. I got to talk to you guys. I played through it a couple times. I was not very good at it the first time that I played it, but I learned that it was mostly you doing it, and then just like some other people doing a little bit of music, doing a little bit of QA testing down at the end. And so it does make sense that this is a May Gardens production. This is your design. This is, as far as I know, your pixel art. You did the game, and then it's like people came to wrap it up together. But it's very very cool that this is not a Red Nexus project. This is a May Gardens original, and I think that that's you should be absolutely very proud of that.
Thank you. Yeah, it was a nice way to kind of wrap it up with a bit of extra help. I had some extra help on programming for the past like 8 months or so, which was great. Just all the hey, the game needs a save system. I started it and never finished it. Have some help with that. I can just focus on polishing the design. Hey, Steam API, get that dealt with. I can focus on the design, on the art, on the other pieces. And then yeah, Adam Crashdroid, who did the music for Peglin, helped me out with a few music tracks like right at the end, which was really nice because I'm a musician. I'm not much of a composer. I'm not like I don't have a recording set up. So like the main menu theme in the game is just I shoved this microphone into my piano and did what I could. It was really nice having a balance. I found where on Peglin, Peglin's not. I mean, I care very much about Peglin, but Peglin's not my baby, right? Peglin's not my like brainchild, and it's nice to be able to have a project like that where it's a bit more like, let me support you. Let me like, hey, here's some like data, here's some spreadsheets. Let's talk about it, and then do what you want with it. And then also having Fowl Damage, which was like, okay, I do need to make the big decisions here. When I was just working on Fowl Damage alone as a solo dev and nothing else, I found it exhausting. I always joke about like I'm not a sound designer. How should this sound? I don't know, good. Like sure, I'll apply my like lens as a game designer to it and try to like make sure it contributes to the world building and like the atmosphere and all that. But at the end of the day, it's maybe not my like forte, but I still have to make those decisions.
Yeah, yeah. There's a lot of pressure that goes into making all sorts of designs, and I think that's one of the things I really want to hone in on having conversations with you and more devs in the future is how specific every decision is that goes into making a game that most people playing games don't even think about. You hit a block in Minecraft, you do something in a game, you swing your sword, and there's like 7 different decisions that go into even making that work properly. There is you doing the foley or the sound design to make sure that the sound sounds right when you are making that action. How does that interact? How much damage does that do? What's the animation like? There are a lot of things go into that, and you as a solo dev, you had to be making those decisions. I have to say, I don't know if you got any help with the polishing up the sound design. I thought the sound was great in this game.
Thank
I
you.
especially love the sound that your I guess your character makes, your egg character makes when you go up the little ramp. There's like a where does that sound come from? I never designed a sound myself, but I remember doing that a couple times. Be like, that's a
Yeah,
really nice little soft sound. What's the source of that?
I this is kind of a fun thing with having this game that I started in 2018, worked on for a few years, went on the back burner, and then judged it back up. Is sometimes it feels like I'm doing archaeology. I like I found like I found some particle effect generator and I had no idea what it was. I had no recollection of making it, and I didn't end up using it in the game. But moments like that where I'm like, I forgot this existed. But I think that the little hoop is my voice pitched down. I think that was just like me and the microphone, and then put some effects on it so it sounds a bit less like someone's just making sounds at you. Yeah.
Oh, one interesting little design decision that I noticed in Foul Damage that I think really helps to the clarity of the game is that the environments fade to black when it's not things that you're interacting with, that you can interact with. There are backgrounds and there are the foregrounds, but outside of the level elements that you can interact with, it's black. And I think that that's a
Mm-hmm.
very nice decision to keep your eyes focused on what can I interact with. There's oftentimes that I find myself playing a game and sometimes not even really being able to tell, is this something I can jump on, land on, interact with? And I'm curious about that design decision. Is that something you came to later in the project after like iterating and realizing that maybe the screen was a little bit hard to parse with your eyes? Because I think that really helps the focus of the game quite a bit.
Technically, the very first prototype did not have that style of tiles, and it was very
Yeah.
much like a wall is going to be like bricks the whole way through and
Mhm.
stuff like that. But pretty early on, I had to completely refactor the game, actually because GameMaker went from version like 1 to version 2, and it basically became like I need to remake the game from the ground up.
Oh, wow.
That's when the character became an egg, because before that was like a little Mega Man dude. That's when like the kind of darker like visual themes and atmosphere came in. From the start, I really liked the juxtaposition of this little egg in this like weird world, and I ran with it from there. I think probably the reason the tiles like fade to black like that started off mostly just as it was easier for me to do, And then, as you refine and work on it, kind of realizing like, okay, this is like, this works in multiple ways. It's more efficient for me to produce this as a solo developer, and it's also contributing well to the design of keeping your view focused on the action and what's interactable.
Totally. Yeah, and I've realized that we've gone through this entire thing, and I don't even really know what inspired you to make Foul Damage, to make a game with this sort of unique approach to puzzle platforming, to fall damage in a way that I've never seen done really in a game before. Even jump damage in a way, and
Yeah.
also being a game about a little egg that rolls around and that impacts the physics in certain ways. And so give me two things on this question. Number one, what is your sort of pitch for Foul Damage when you like want to describe to someone in an easy way? What makes it unique? And number two, what went into making that design decision of, oh, I want to make a game where you can break very easily or that you're rolling around, those sort of things.
So when I have been pitching it, it's fun on the show floor because the game's right there. And I can tell people very little. And I'll just be like, oh, it's a little platformer, kind of puzzly. You're an egg. It breaks pretty easy. And I get to just sit back and watch them make their first jump, watch the egg break, and realize what's going on. Outside of that setting, I like the phrase, the platforming is the puzzle.
Yeah, I was actually thinking about that while I was playing it. You've heard I played a lot of puzzle platformers in my life, and that those are things where you are using platforming to solve puzzles. But in my mind, I was like, well, this is a platform puzzler. This is where as you're saying, the platforming is the puzzle and is the physics that is the puzzle. And I thought that was a really special sort of inversion. I mean, it's not the first game to ever done that, but an inversion of the puzzle platforming trope. You're not like, Braid or something. You're not doing platforming puzzles or not puzzles while you're platforming. This is the platforming is puzzles, and I think that's really cool.
Yeah. Yeah, it was fun to design around, and sometimes it was kind of challenging where I could have put so much more content in the game if I wanted to just do like just puzzles. But I always kind of tried to stay true to no, it's got to be a foul damage puzzle. I don't just want to have like a light box puzzle in a side room that you just do, or I guess they're technically in the editor they're called slimo blocks, but the blocks that follow you is like how this is basically a crate pushing puzzle, but I got to make sure that it's still staying in theme as being like a foul damage puzzle where it's about the platforming more than it's about just pushing blocks around. As far as the idea originally, it kind of just started with a joke. And it started off even like with more emphasis on head bonking. And actually, the very first demo, like prototype I made, was almost more of a Metroidvania, where there's like a cave you couldn't get into because you'd have to bonk your head. So you had to go in this little like loop, and you'd find a helmet.
Oh, sure.
And then now that you have the helmet, it's going to protect your head, and you can do your super jump up into the ceiling of the cave and keep going. Like I love platformers. I love making platformers and playing them. I love all the little like nitty gritty decisions that go unnoticed but are felt. Acceleration, deceleration. How does the jump feel? How does landing feel? All these little things, and I think it was really well suited for like with this idea. Is like I can do this. I want to do this. Let's see how far I can push this. Like I mentioned, the original prototype was just this little Mega Man dude, and when you fell, it's just like splat, right? Corpse on the ground, a little bit grim. It wasn't really the vibe I wanted. So when I did that big refactor, really the egg just came from the idea of how can I better convey the core mechanic, and I think everyone generally understands that eggs are fragile.
But it makes sense to me explaining that you're really fascinated by the sort of physics and gameplay feel of platformers is how unique it feels to play Foul Damage. Your jump arc in this game and the way that it interacts with fall damage and acceleration and things is unlike any other platform I've ever played. This is one of the few platformers that has one jump arc. There is no, if you hold down the button halfway just for a second, you get a little half hop or whatever that you'll do in Mario or Crash or something like that. This is you press your jump button and you are committed to that arc. You can you go high, you don't go very far, which is another inversion. Instead of jumping mostly horizontal, this is mostly a vertical jump. And then what I think makes Foul Damage so special in the way that I sort of pitch it to people like, oh, you should check out this game, it's very interesting, is the fact that you need to land higher than where you started. Because if you just jump from the same height to the same y-axis height, you'll die. And that is something that I've never seen in a game before. And so the way that impacts the puzzles and the way that impacts the way that your mind thinks about just jumping from platform to platform and then using fall damage and avoiding fall damage as that's really the mode of traversal. It's avoiding fall damage. It's not making it across the gap and knowing your technical skill. It's how am I going to navigate myself to not die? And I think that combined with the sort of single screen nature of each of these sort of platforming puzzles, I think combines to make a really efficient gameplay loop of I need to focus on the environment rather than my skill as a player.
Yeah, I'm glad that kind of came through. There's a few sections in the game that are timing based and are kind of invoke the skill element a bit more. You know, the claw chasing you or the water level lowering, and you have to chase it down. And like, yes, it is a skill section, but more so than the skill section, and more so than even being a test, it's a way for me to try and like bake in the lessons that you've been learning. It was really important to me because as you finish the first chapter of the game and you exit the factory, I want to start doing more of the physics. I want to start adding more mechanics, more kind of modes of existing. When the egg's underwater, your movement is completely different. But I didn't want to start doing that until I felt confident that the player had learned the lesson of how the game works at its core, right? If you're still confused about, wait, like, do I have a variable jump height? How far can I fall? If you still kind of have those questions, and then I start introducing like, oh, when you're underwater, it's a totally different platformer, that I wouldn't want to muddy people's learning experience. So that was really why I put in like the claw and things like that.
Yeah, yeah, and one thing I think is really interesting about how different it does feel is that, at least for me, I very quickly internalized the elements. I've played so many platformers in my life, and it's sort of intuitively how that works. What I was saying earlier, there are things like doing a full press versus a half press, and that in other platformers will get you things, and you internalize that as a game player. You don't need to like teach yourself that every single time. But foul damage, I think that you wanting to teach players, I think that comes through very nicely when I was playing it, because I would notice the sort of Mario 1-1 type of teaching you how physics works, how certain interactions with certain how far apart different platforms are, and then introducing that one or two screens later, and then having to like, oh, I learned that earlier, I can apply that here, and I think that's really smart design in how focused it is. I pretty quickly internalized, even though I did the math. I think your jump arc is like 7 blocks tall or 7 units tall or something like that. And if you fall more than 3, I think it is, then you take damage. I did that math like later on, like sort of my second or third playthrough, but I realized that I'd kind of internalized that, and so I didn't know the exact math when I was playing it, but especially for the first time. But I see, oh, this tower, this platform is about this high up the screen. I know that I can make that, or the gap between these two is just too far. I know that I won't make that. And so, of course, there was a lot of trial and error that went into that, but I definitely was able to internalize it even before I'd like sat there and counted, okay, this block is this block and this block. But efficient game design is what I'm saying.
Thank you. Yeah, it was super. I think it was kind of the crux of the game was I needed to make sure that could happen because sitting there and counting tiles is not fun. It's never, the game is not meant to be like sit there and okay, I should be able to make that. So like a lot of like, yeah, trying to teach through the level design early on, repetition being a key part of like learning throughout the whole game. Every now and again, I'll just throw another like I started calling it a 1, 2, 3. You drop onto a little platform and you can either roll left, that's like 2 blocks down, or you can roll right, that's 3 blocks down, and going the 3 blocks will kill you, left won't. And I'll just like even almost towards the like before last chapter of the game, I'll kind of toss in little screens like that now and again, just always kind of trying to do that callback reinforcement, make sure you still got it.
I'm curious about the secrets in the game. There are a lot of little collectibles that are these purple feathers, and then I guess spoilers for Foul Damage. There are also these hidden green feathers that the game doesn't tell you about. And I'm curious, in terms of inspiration, what games did you play that sort of impacted the way that you designed hiding secrets in the levels and adding collectibles? Because to me, it felt very Celeste in the way that there's just like a thing
Mm.
sort of hiding off a screen, and if you go out this little exit that the game doesn't tell you about, there's a little extra puzzle, and they're also all totally optional, which I think is a great way to handle collectibles like that. So what went into the secret hiding process, and are there any games that inspired the way that you hid secrets in the game?
Celeste comes up a lot, and it's definitely got to be in there, but I don't think it was ever really consciously I find that interesting that people like see so much Celeste, but Celeste had just come out when I started working on this, pretty much. So it makes sense that it was probably on my mind a lot. I have a bit of like a collectibles philosophy of I really, and this comes back to League of Legends, playing a lot of League of Legends in high school. Because eventually I started to realize like when a game never ends, oftentimes you don't stop playing it when you're done. You stop playing it when you don't like it anymore, and that's always felt kind of sad to me. Personally, obviously, for some people, big collectathon kind of stuff, they really enjoy it, and that's great. But personally, I don't want to make a game that is gonna kind of push someone to play for longer than they naturally wanted to, more than that, like at least within reason. And so the green feathers kind of came from that, where okay, purple feathers or pink feathers, I guess the achievement text calls them. I put those more on the critical path. Those are more like those are feathers that I feel good about saying, hey, you want 100% the game, you got to get this guy. And then green feathers, the game on purpose does not tell you how many there are. It just tells you how many you have. And to me, that's just sort of like some extra flavor, some extra fun. If you really want to go search every nook and cranny, because that's something that you earnestly want to do because you're enjoying that process, you can totally go and do it. But the game's not going to kind of goad you into it any more than necessary. It's at least a hope. Obviously, on the flip side, it could make this like situation where it's more annoying to look for everything. But it was kind of a risk I took. I think that also doing this kind of allowed me to be more creative and liberal with the green feathers. There might be some green feathers that nobody's found yet because I really just put them somewhere stupid, and I think that's cool. If I'd put a total green feather count, then I might not have been able to like do that quite so much.
For me, the green feathers and the fact that you don't see them and you don't know about them and you don't know how many there are makes me feel the designer's touch or your intent just a little bit more, because when you stumble into one, it's not like, oh, this fits very nicely into the design. It's like, oh, this is a surprise. And obviously, just
Mm-hmm.
knowing that you made this game, you made these design decisions, it's like, oh, someone made the choice to put this out of the way, and interacting with that puzzle, I think, makes it feel a little bit more special. And to be completely honest, I didn't 100% the game with all the pink feathers. I barely got any of the green feathers because I was focused on finishing the game, number one, and number two, a lot of those puzzles were too hard for me. But I did get through the game, and there were very few times that I was stuck. And in my first playthrough, which I got about half of the pink feathers, I think, took me about 3 hours. And for me, I love short games, and that 3 hour runtime, I think, is perfect for me as a game player. Of I can sit down. I did it in one sitting, but you could do it in 2, 3 sittings, and feel pretty comfortable about it. Beat it in a weekend, beat it in a couple of days, and those are usually end up being some of my favorite games that you can do that. But for me, what it pushed me to do was speed run the game. And you mentioned that you'd seen that I'd done that earlier. I played through the game for speed 3 times, and I've only in any capacity attempted speedrunning of a game twice, I think, in my life. I did when I was very young and I first understood what speedrunning was. I played Fez for speedrunning, and I loved Fez. It's one of my favorite games. And then Super Mario Odyssey is another game that I really got into speedrunning, and I taught myself routes and stuff. But I've never uploaded a speedrunning video. I've never actually uploaded my time to a site or anything. So speedrunning is not something I gravitate towards, but there was something about Foul Damage in its short length and the fact that I knew I could understand the game better and better that inspired me to speedrun. And so I'm curious for you, was that something you consciously chose, of like, oh, this is going to be a very speedrunnable game? And were there any sort of design decisions that went into making sure that it was something you could beat quick, learn, and then get faster and faster at?
Short answer, yes. I definitely was thinking about speedrunning with the game. I really love, I've talked about how I love platformers. I love all those little things, and I love movement tech. I love like weird ways to get to go faster and to like speed yourself up. And this was a really hard game to try and fit that into, because if you're not careful, you could just ruin the whole premise, right? We were talking a bit earlier about some of those like the things we're so used to in platforming, like variable jump height, depending on how long you press A. Another big one was coyote jump, like being able to jump a few frames after you've rolled off a ledge. I believe that by default in the game you have 1 frame of coyote jump. I think it's just enough where like I see people do it fairly often, so it's doing its job of improving on game feel. But even literally just that 1 frame of coyote jump allows certain skips that you couldn't do otherwise. I believe when I was testing it and implementing it, if even 2 frames of coyote jump started letting you like land on things one tile lower than you're supposed to.
Oh, interesting.
Even just like 2 frames of starting to fall would really start to kind of degrade the like fundamental puzzle of the game, and you could clearly jump off of any ledge. So I really had to be careful of that kind of thing. For example, I made a decision pretty early on that the horizontal move speed is technically uncapped. You can only get so fast with your own input, but by using other means, you can go literally. There is no cap. And that's really allowed for some interesting things that I hadn't expected, from like the little slopes. And when engineering a game, I've been trying to like leave loose ends on purpose, so that the game could be interesting for speedruns while still staying true to its core.
Yeah, and I think I definitely unconsciously picked up on that because I finished my first 3-hour playthrough. I'm like, well, I might as well just see how quick I can do it the next time. And I got it down to just over an hour, which is 2 hours down from my first run to my second. And then I believe I was just about 45 minutes for my third one. It definitely had that sort of sense of momentum for me where I'm like, oh, I not only know what to do and like where to jump, because sometimes can be a little bit trial and error of like, especially like in later sections of the game, I found myself like testing to see if I would die falling off of things, be like, okay, scratch that off the list. I know I can't do that. For someone who doesn't usually speedrun, I felt that I was able to teach myself the game very efficiently. Even if there were a couple moments that were trial and error, frustrating a little bit, I was able to like scratch it off and be like, okay, no, I get it now. And make sure that I didn't screw that up in future runs. The final thing that I wanted to ask is about level elements, because one of my favorite things in platformers is when specific areas, specific levels have a unique gimmick, a unique level element that mixes up the gameplay a little bit and teaches you a little bit of physics and makes that level stand out from the rest. What were your favorite level elements to design? Things like the ramps, like those blocks that jump or that move once you jump off of them. Um, were there any that you really liked designing? And are there any ones that you came up with that didn't quite make the final cut of the game? What was that process like?
Yeah, it was a lot of fun making up, like trying to figure out mechanics that would like interact well with the core idea of the game. I really love the slopes. There's something nice in this game about having moments where you can just kind of have some fun. At some point pretty late on, I added, I don't know if you found them, but there's like some underwater secrets in the riverbed, or like in the dam. There's a section where you're kind of just forced to spend some time underwater. A little breather. The egg's not gonna break. And it's a similar thing where a lot of people are like, oh, Tony Hawk, when you're doing little floops off of the slopes and stuff. And just being able to have a little bit of like lightheartedness, and you're not just constantly stressing about breaking the egg. So I really enjoy the slopes. Puzzle wise, I really enjoy the blocks that chase you. I feel like that's where I actually had to be careful in one of the earlier versions of the Weeping Tree. The puzzles, I kind of came to realize where, so I was talking about earlier, oh, these almost aren't foul damage puzzles anymore. They're kind of just block slidey puzzles. So sort of like a very traditional puzzle element of like you gotta slide a block around. But it's been fun to make the levels with those. As far as scrapped content, same as earlier when we talked about like the game length, I think there's probably close to as much scrapped content as there is actual content in the game. I was very picky, but very early on in development, I had this mechanic that was very cool but very unwieldy, of buttons on walls that would swap gravity.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Yeah, so you could like jump up into a wall, hit this button, and then gravity would become such that that button was now on the ground. And the whole screen would rotate and everything, and it made for some really cool puzzles. For the main character especially, down could be in any direction, and your inputs had to work in any direction, and it just wasn't, unfortunately, worth maintaining. Like, it would have such a strong effect on everything else in the game just for this one cool mechanic. But I still think about the gravity swapping and kind of wish I could have done it.
Yeah, that's very cool. And it's just cool to know that you got this well of ideas and you're pulling from it, and it's good game design to be like, no, this is not working. This has cascading effects that I didn't intend. Even if it would be cool, you need to keep focus. So hopefully through this conversation, everyone who's watching learn a little bit about game design, a little bit about your process that went into making Fowl Damage, which you can go get on Steam right now. And I suggest that you do, because as I said, I played this game. I really liked it. And I even went as far as to make a little bit of funny fan art for the game. And I made a new cover for it for Backlog, because I love using Backlog. So I'm unabashedly a fan of this game, your work, May, and I had a lot of fun talking to you on this first dev interview that I've done. Thank you very much for joining me.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. This was a great chat.
And yeah, finally, everyone, go check out May's work. Join the Red Nexus Discord, which I'll have linked in the description of this video, and play Fowl Damage. Like seriously, I don't want this game to go underlooked. I'm trying to do my best, do my part to make sure that this game has as much exposure as it can get. And we will see you guys in the future.